Hello, my name is Chris and I've been a teacher of business and economics for the past 27 years. Today we're going to look at the supply of labour. So our objectives today are to understand why the supply curve for labour slopes upwards from left to right, understand what the substitution effect is, understand what the income effect is, and understand monetary and non-monetary considerations can affect the supply of labour. So let's move on. Here we can see the supply of labour illustrated as a curve on a graph with the axes of hourly wage rate and the hours supplied. As you can see, as we move up the wage rate axis, our supply of labour increases. So the higher the wage, the more willing the labour force are to work and do additional hours, which I'm sure you may have had some personal experience of. And move on from this one. So the substitution effect. The higher the wage, workers will substitute labour for leisure. So as the wage rates increase, workers are far more willing to give up hours of their leisure to actually work and earn some more money. So for example, if the wage rates at, let's say, Christmas Day it's double time, workers are far more willing to go in to work in a pub or wait on in a restaurant if they're being paid double the amount of money, and they are willing to give up their leisure time at Christmas to do that. So that is why the wages on a Christmas Day and perhaps Boxing Day and New Year's Day are considerably higher to entice workers to give up their leisure time and supply more hours of labour. So another effect that can impact on the amount of labour supplied is the income effect. An increase in the hourly rate means that workers can earn the same amount of money but work less hours. Usually the substitution effect is more powerful than the income effect. So although those workers could, if in effect, let's go back to that Christmas Day example, if those workers perhaps could earn twice as much money on Christmas Day, they may not cancel the hours they've got planned to work later on in the week as well, because they're seeing that they're going to earn good money for those small amount of hours they've been willing to give up in terms of leisure. So the substitution effect is far more powerful than the income effect. Now I would say as you get older, the income effect becomes more powerful. Substitution effect, certainly for younger workers, is much more of an incentive to work than the income effect. And we'll come on to that, why that is later. So, non-monetary and monetary considerations. The welfare that a worker derives from supply and labour comes in two parts added together called the net advantage. So in other words, by supplying labour, you're being paid, so you'll be gaining welfare from a wage, but there'll also be other things that you get from doing that job. And these are called non-monetary benefits. So you might get job security. You might get good working conditions. You might get good holidays. So for example, a teacher's net advantage is the wage they get paid, but also the fact that they get good holidays throughout the year. They've also got some good job security and are given a good pension when they decide to retire. So that makes up the net advantage for actually sacrificing your time to do that job. Other things that might be contributed might be that you've got nice people to work with, a nice place to work at, company car. It could just generally be a nice place to work. And so the welfare derived from the wage is not the only welfare they will get. The other welfare could be derived from those non-monetary benefits. So the market supply of labour. The supply curve for labour is the sum of the curves for all workers. Most workers will have an upward sloping curve. That curve can shift. A change of non-monetary benefits. So for example, it might be that the wages haven't increased, but the holiday rates have got better. So they might get more holidays, or you might get a company car, or there might be better working conditions. So that might change the supply of work. Changes in income, a rise in income can lead to an increase in demand for leisure time. So for instance, you might inherit some money or win some money on a lottery, or your property might gain in value and you might release some of that money. And so you could perhaps work slightly less and get more leisure time. So that substitution effect. Changes in population. So for example, recently in the UK, lorry drivers have been on a shortage after Brexit. So during Brexit, before Brexit, we had a lot of European lorry drivers filling in where we had shortages in the UK supply of lorry drivers. Since Brexit, those lorry drivers haven't been over in this country, and so we've had effectively a reduction in population, and we've seen a shift of lorry drivers to the left. So we've got less lorry drivers available to drive those lorries. The same can be said about hospitality, with a lot of European workers going back to their countries of origin rather than staying in the UK after Brexit. And so we've got a shortage in workers for hospitality, like hotels, cafes, restaurants, and bars. And so effectively reduce the population that could work in those areas. So the supply curve has shifted to the left. Change in expectations. We might see that people are now willing to work longer as they expect to live longer. And so workers are working into their 60s and 70s, where in the past, because life expectancy has been a bit lower, they would have retired around about 60 to enjoy their retirement. But now with better healthcare and better nutrition, we are expected to live longer. And so workers are willing to work longer into their old age to supplement their pensions and effectively have a good retirement later on in life. So if you don't expect to retire too early, then you will continue to work longer and as you expect to live longer. Because you used to be retiring around about 60, 65 and expect to live perhaps 10 more years. Nowadays, you're probably expected to live 20 years. And so you will need to work a little bit longer to pay for that retirement. As you can see those people in retirement there. So let's have a look at these shifts. Just like a supply and demand, a supply curve shifting outward to the right. So for instance, the wage rate stays the same, but perhaps the conditions of working have improved, and so people are more willing to supply their labour at that wage rate. It could also be that we've got a population growth, and so the supply curve shifts across. And effectively, with the increase in visas being issued by the UK government, this is what's happened in terms of lorry drivers briefly while we recruit more drivers domestically. So the supply has increased because they've offered visas to foreign drivers. Shift the other way, shift to the left. As I said before, a reduction in population. We might see a shift to the left of workers, hospitality workers, shift to the left, less people available to run hotels, restaurants and so on. So we've got a shift to the left where supply is reduced from S to S1, and you can see the number of hours supplied has reduced from L to L1, although the wage rate has remained the same. This could also work for perhaps working conditions getting worse and seeing that other industries are more attractive, and so the supply of labour shifting out of that marketplace into another marketplace, and so we'll see a reduction in supply of labour. Now, the elasticity of supply for labour will depend on a number of factors. The availability of suitable labour in other industries, e.g. a large pool of unskilled labour, but something like teaching pool quite small. So teaching is relatively inelastic because you can't create a teacher overnight. But for someone serving behind a bar, it could be argued that that's relatively unskilled, and so you could recruit someone tomorrow to fill that position. So you can see unskilled labour is relatively elastic, whereas something like teaching or a football player could be inelastic because it's quite a small pool of people that you're recruiting from, and so there's not always available workers there. Time kind of links to that previous one. In the short run, labour force is relatively inelastic. So for instance, if we found that we were running short of, perhaps we were stretched in a hotel and we couldn't get the jobs done, it'd be very hard to recruit someone there and then, that minute. But if we spent perhaps a week or 2 weeks, we could recruit more people quite easily. So in the short run, it's inelastic, but in the long run, we could train and recruit other people to fill those positions, so it would be elastic. The same could be said of things like teaching, nursing, being a doctor. In the long run, you can train and recruit people, but in the short term, you can't. And so the demand, so the supply of labour will be quite inelastic. The extent of underemployment and unemployment. This goes without saying, if there isn't anybody out there to employ, in other words, we have full employment in the economy, then it's very hard to recruit someone into the post. What you'd have to do is increase the wage rate to attract them from another industry. If there's high rates of underemployment or unemployment, then it'd be relatively easier, so quite elastic in terms of the supply of labour. So hopefully we understand why the the supply curve for labour slopes upwards from left to right, i.e. the higher the pay, the more willing people are to give up time and substitute leisure time for work time. Understand what the substitution effect is. So again, as I say, it's substituting leisure time for work time. Understand what the income effect is. So as wages rise, we might not have to work as many hours to earn as much money. And understand the monetary and non-monetary considerations can affect the supply of labour. So non-monetary might be holidays, job security, the friends you make at work, the fact that you've got a nice view out of your office. It could be just that it's generally a nice place to work. So that's the non-monetary considerations. Thank you for listening. I hope that made sense.